Shalom and welcome. Today's video is going to be off the cuff. I don't really have a script per se or notes to go off of. As you can see, I don't even have the lighting set up the way I usually do, but I thought it was important to make a video just to kind of express my thoughts on a few things. And as always, please feel free to leave your comments down below and let me know what you think on today's topic. But as you know, there's always been some sort of a rift between Jews and Christians, and that's been there for thousands of years, as you know. But as of late, there seems to be a different chasm that has grown, and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's very concerning to me, as it should be concerning to everybody. But the chasm or the split that I see is within the Christian community. So there has been this, what we would call the Hebraic movement, Hebrew roots movement. People call it different things. I don't really like using that terminology or giving it that type of a label, but you could put me in that group. But really what I am, or what we are, is just followers of the way, just followers of the Messiah as they followed him in the first century. There's really nothing different. The only difference it would be is between what we believe in the quote unquote Christian community. And I can understand that because within the Christian community comes a lot of orthodoxy, and most Christians don't really understand that there is a ton of orthodoxy that comes along with the beliefs. Especially new believers, they think that their belief system is just set in stone and it's always been this way, when in fact it has not. It is a system of religion. It is orthodoxy in many ways. A lot of the traditions have come from the Roman Catholic Church, and even if you look at Protestantism, you think that a lot of the beliefs and customs and traditions got shed from the Protestant Reformation, but really they didn't. Many of those traditions and customs went through that Protestant Reformation, and you see them in our churches today. And I myself was in that system of religion for many, many years, and I was taught certain doctrines. And as a matter of fact, there came a time where I was being trained to become a pastor, and one of the qualifications to become a pastor was to read the systematic theology. The one that I was given was Wayne Grudem's systematic theology. But what I've learned is that the way that we think here in America or in the West is really centered around a Greek-centered, Greek-minded theology. The way our mind thinks is in a Greek philosophical way. The Greeks look at the world or even biblical matters. They put everything in doctrines. The Hebraic mind doesn't look at the Bible in that way. It's a cohesive story from beginning to end. And although there's of course beliefs within that storyline, the overarching storyline that God has planned, but the Hebraic mind doesn't put every one of those thoughts into doctrines, and the Christian mind does, or the Western mind does do that. And just to get to the heart of the matter, we have to build bridges between not only the Jewish community and the Christian community, but now it seems that we have to build bridges between the Christian community and I would call it the biblical followers, the followers of the Messiah. Followers of the Messiah from a biblical standpoint, and the Christian community. And I know that may stir some pots or ruffle some feathers, but that is the fact, that there is a chasm, a split that has become between the two. And many times it seems as if we're just arguing and debating and just going back and forth and not really discussing these matters the way they should be discussed. It seems like walls are being built, fences are being put up instead of bridges. And my proposition is to build bridges from one side to the other side, not to compromise but rather to understand each other's position. Because in my estimation, I would venture to think that we probably agree in about 90 to 95%, maybe even more, of the things that we believe. What becomes a problem is that we define terms differently. Let me give you an example. In the Christian community, it's long been the staple that Jesus came to not necessarily to do away with the law, but to fulfill the law. In that the Torah is no longer needed. Now we are free. I don't know if you caught that, but when you believe that, you say that he has not done away with the law, but rather that he's maybe combined the law into two: love your neighbor, love God, and then love your neighbor. The thought is that he didn't replace the law, but he fulfilled the law through those two commandments. But in saying so, you have replaced the law, because you're thinking that the two commandments have replaced the law. So in essence, it's done away with. It's not said that it's done away with. The words that are used are, it's been fulfilled. And of course, they take this from the Brit Hadashah, from the New Testament, where it says that he fulfilled the law. He didn't come away to do away with the law. Not one jot or tittle will be done away with, but that he came to fulfill the law. But fulfillment doesn't mean replacement, and it doesn't mean to do away with the law that was already in place. And that's where I believe that the definitions matter. What are we talking about? When we say law, what are we talking about? You know, one of the biggest things that helped me understand this all, and my prayer is that our Christian brothers and sisters at least look into these things and try to understand that when you say law, it's something completely different from what the biblical aspect of the Torah was meant to do. From a Christian mindset, the law is something that is old, it's done away with, it's something we don't need. But when you understand the definition of what the law is and what it was meant to be, you will see how outrageously ridiculous that thought is. Let me explain. In a Hebraic wedding, when a man and a woman were to get married, the fathers would be involved. So the father and the son would go over to the soon-to-be bride and her father's house, and they would knock on the door. And if the father opened the door, then the son and his father would go in and they would have supper with them. I don't know if that sounds familiar, but that's exactly what Yeshua says, what Jesus says in the New Testament. That I knock on the door, and those who open the door, I will come in and sup with them. Jesus was trying to give us a picture of what a Hebraic wedding is. In America, in our Western minds, again, with the Western mindset, we will never see that. Unless you're looking at it through a Hebraic lens, you would never catch that. He's trying to give you the analogy of a wedding, of an ancient Near Eastern wedding, a Hebraic wedding, of what it would look like. And when the father and the son would go in, they would have supper with the bride and her father. And in that supper, in that meal, they would iron out what they would call a ketubah. A ketubah is just a document, or a legal binding document. I got to be careful when I say the word legal, because in the Christian community, you say that, everything seems to sound like it's legalistic, but it's not. You got to hear me out. A ketubah would be signed. It's a legal binding document. Basically, it's the soon-to-be husband is writing down what property or flocks or his inheritance that he's bringing into the marriage, what he's bringing to the marriage, what is he bringing in, and the wife the soon-to-be wife, would do the same thing. Whatever those terms were. And that would be called a ketubah. It's a wedding contract, a wedding document between a man and a woman, between a husband, the bridegroom, and the bride. And that's what it is with us, with the church, with the ecclesia, or in Hebrew, the kahal. When we are in covenant with God, we have a wedding covenant. We have a wedding document. We have a ketubah. And there's only one ketubah in the entire Bible. Only one. And that is the Torah. So when people say that the law is no longer needed, it's null and void. We don't need it anymore. It's been fulfilled. If you think about it from a marital standpoint, it sounds absolutely ridiculous. Who in their right mind would do away with their wedding covenant that they have with their wife? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever, but yet it's what we have been taught. We have been taught that we are no longer under the law. And we just say law, but we don't define what it is. I'm giving you the definition so that we can build a bridge, tear down these fences, tear down these walls, and let's start building fences by defining our terms and understand what we're talking about. Because we should all desire to be in covenant with the bridegroom. Because when Jesus comes back, when Yeshua comes back, he is coming back for what? A spotless bride. The entire Bible, the entire book, all of the books in the Bible are about marriage. It's a marriage book. We are going from the garden to the garden. The book of Genesis starts in the garden, and the book of Revelation ends in the garden. From garden to garden. And in between that is the marriage. You can sum up the entire Bible in that simplicity. Of course, there's more complex matters and stories that go along with it, of course. But to simplify it, that's exactly what it is. I mean, if you were married with your wife and you went to some business function somewhere in another state, and your wife stayed at home, and there was maybe a lot of women that were there, and along with other men as well, and you were mingling with other women that were there and men co-workers, but yet you were faithful to your wife. And you went home that night to the hotel and you called your wife and said, I had a long day, but let me explain to you how my day went and how was your day? How were the kids? Did you fulfill your covenant by being faithful to your wife? Of course you did. But because you were faithful to your wife, does that mean that you just get that wedding contract, you rip it up, throw it away and say, I fulfilled it tonight, so now it's no longer needed? It's ridiculous. But yet we argue, we quiver over these little, well, they're not really little. We quibble over these topics when we don't sit down and we don't define our terms. And that's a big problem. That's a big problem within the Christian community, that we are not willing to sit down and talk and understand each other because we are so set in our ways with orthodoxy. It's become a system of religion. It's a system of religion. The systematic theology is a system of religion. And we need to break away from that. We need to start understanding the entire biblical narrative. The other thing that is a big point of contention within the Christian community is, of course, salvation. Now, I want to say two things about salvation. Number one, how salvation relates to the Torah with the ketubah. And then number two, how salvation and the resurrection are tied. And what is that common thread that ties those two together, the salvation and the resurrection? So we'll start first with salvation and the resurrection. We'll start with the latter. Salvation and resurrection. Now, if I say this is going to probably sound strange. Some may even say heretical, but it's not. Hear me out. Your resurrection, my resurrection, The resurrection from the dead, when we rise from our grave, is and always has been and will be in the future when it happens, tied to the land of Israel. I know many people are going to hear that and say, no, absolutely not. It's all about Jesus. Jesus is our resurrection. There's nothing else. It's Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And to which I would agree. Without the blood of the Messiah, we don't have a resurrection. You're absolutely right. But when you've been taught just to think one way and no other way, you miss so many other aspects that are vitally important. As a matter of fact, you miss the entire gospel message, because the gospel message is much more full than just one way of thinking. Our resurrection is intimately tied to the land of Israel. And let me explain why. And I would venture to think you would actually even agree with me, because what I am saying may sound controversial, but it's only controversial because no one is willing to sit down and talk and to discuss these matters. So let's break it apart piece by piece. The resurrection. In the book of Thessalonians, it says that at the last trumpet blast, the Yeshua, Jesus, will come. And when it's blown, that trumpet blast is blown, that last trump, when it's blown, the dead in Christ shall rise. Those who are alive will meet them in the air, and they will be together with the Lord forever. I don't think there's anybody that would. I'm basically just reading the New Testament, so that it's impossible for anybody to disagree with that. I would imagine. So I think we're all in agreement with that. Now, where does Jesus go to rule and reign when he comes back? When that last trumpet blast is blown and we're raised from the dead, he's not coming to the United States to be president or king. He's not going to France or to Germany or anywhere else to be a prime minister or a president or a chancellor. He's going to the land of Israel. You might even say he's coming to rule from the New Jerusalem. To which I would say the New Jerusalem is absolutely biblical, but you don't read about the New Jerusalem until Revelation, 21, 22, after the 1,000-year reign, after the 7,000 years, after that seventh millennium is over, we head into eternity. Then yes, the New Jerusalem comes down out of heaven. And you can read that in the book of Revelation at the very end. I believe it's 21 or 22. But before that, you have the seventh millennium. You have the 1,000-year reign where Jesus comes back and he rules on the earth from Jerusalem, the capital, which would be of Israel. So he comes back, we are raised from the dead, and then he goes and we go with him and we reign with him in Israel, in Jerusalem. Those two things, the resurrection and Jerusalem, Israel, are tied. You can't, I can't, nobody can. I don't care who you are. You can't grab a pair of scissors and cut those two things and break them apart and say, well, no, our resurrection is not tied to Israel. It's only tied to Jesus. If it's tied to Israel, then you've already replaced Jesus with Israel. Now you're saying Israel is greater than Jesus and you've replaced Jesus. Everything's about Jesus. No, that's not what I'm saying. But because we don't sit down and talk, we don't have discussions, we're not willing to listen, that's the mindset that's automatically broadcast. Jesus, Yeshua, will be our king in Jerusalem, in Israel. If that doesn't happen, if Yeshua is not king reigning from Israel, then we don't have a resurrection. I don't know if you've heard it that way before, but biblically, that is 100% accurate. Now, is it going to happen? Maybe it won't. Maybe it will. Of course it's going to happen. Of course it's going to happen. We are going to have our resurrection. The Bible is absolutely clear. And God's promises are true. They will come to pass. The promise of our resurrection will happen. The promise of Jesus, Yeshua, reigning from Israel as king, as your king, my king, will happen. Those two things are not opposed. And don't let anybody tell you anything different. They are one and the same. Now, how the Torah and salvation relate to each other. If you look at salvation from a Hebraic perspective, try just for a moment, to understand salvation from a Hebraic mindset, not from a Greek, Hellenistic, Western mindset, because they're vastly different. In a Hebraic mindset, if you were to be talking to first century believers of Yeshua, of the Messiah, whether you were Jew or Gentile, either way, it doesn't matter. If you were one of them, salvation would be different than we think of it now, thousands of years later, because of through Roman Catholic, through Protestant Reformation, and customs and traditions, we've completely diluted what salvation was meant to signify. Salvation is meant to signify eternal life, obviously, eternal life through Yeshua. But when do we get that eternal life? When do we get that resurrection from the dead? You have to arise from the dead. It's when he returns and when we're in Israel. So the redemption of the house of Israel, the redemption of Ephraim, which you see that throughout the scriptures. You see it in, I think it's Jeremiah 30, verse 3. You see it in Deuteronomy 30, verse 3. You see it in Jeremiah 16, verse 16. I mean, it's throughout the scriptures. There's literally probably hundreds of citations of where God is going to reunite the two houses together, the house of Israel and the house of Judah, the house of Yehuda. Sometimes in the scriptures, the house of Israel is referred to as Ephraim. So when Ephraim, or the house of Israel, is returned back to the land, go read. You don't believe me? Go read Ezekiel chapter 37. There's two prophecies in there. The prophecy of the dry bones and the prophecy of the two sticks. And just very quickly, I'm not going to go into detail. I want you to go read it and verify what I'm saying. The dry bones. Ezekiel sees a valley of dry bones, and God gives him a vision of those bones coming together, sinew covering them, the bones attaching back again. And then Ezekiel says, but they're still there, Adonai. The bones are still there. And he tells him, prophesy, son of man. Prophesy into these bones. And he did. He prophesied into the bones, and the bones came alive. They came up. They resurrected. And many Christian churches and pastors will stop there. But if you keep reading, he gives you the solution. He says that was a great and exceeding army. It was the house of Israel. They were being restored. The resurrection is tied with the house of Israel. The very next vision that Ezekiel gets in that chapter 37 is of the two sticks. He says, take one stick in one hand, the house of Yehuda, the house of Judah, and take another stick, which represents the house of Ephraim, the house of Israel, and bring those two sticks together. And when you do that, those two sticks will become one in your hand. One stick and one nation. He goes on to say that they will never be two nations ever again. They will be one nation with one king. His servant David will rule over them forever. That is the redemption, or in Hebrew, it would be called the Geulah. That is the redemption, or in a Hebrew mind, what you would look at as the ultimate, or the climax of our salvation when that happens. The fruition, the realization of our salvation is when the redemption of the world, the restoration of the world, the restoration of the land, and the redemption of the land, the Geulah of the land. That is when salvation is realized and 100% complete. That has nothing to do, listen to me, that has absolutely nothing to do with your obligation and your duty as a believer in God, as a believer in Yeshua the Messiah, to keep the Torah. Those two things are on two sides of the table. Keeping the Torah does not equate to salvation. Being obedient to God is not what saves you. And why do I believe that? Because I know many in the Christian community would say that you're just keeping the Torah so you can be saved by your own works. And nobody has said that. That's, again, these are just arguments and debates just to have a debate. And that's not the case. That's not the biblical fact. We keep the Torah, the instructions, the wedding covenant that God has given us to be in covenant with him. We keep that out of love, because we love him, because we want to be in covenant with him. We want to be at the wedding supper of the Lamb. And many are going to say, oh, but you're trying with your own works. You're trying with your own works. And God has already given it as a free gift. It's a free gift, but you have to be obedient to him. You have to want to be in covenant with him also. Because if we're talking about this, you don't have to do anything. It's God already chose you from the beginning of the world. Now we're talking about Calvinism. And I'm not even going to talk about Calvinism in this video, because to me, that's not even a discussion. It's like off the table. But so many times Christians are thinking in a Calvinistic mindset, and they don't really know it because they haven't gone to study it. Go and study and understand what Calvinism is. It's a fatalistic worldview. But salvation and obedience to Torah have nothing to do with each other. Why? Because there is no solution for the one thing that humanity suffers from, and that's death. There's a multitude of sins that one can commit according to the Torah, according to the Bible. But there are some sins that if you commit, the only solution is to be put to death. And although in the Bible, there's all sorts of offerings that you can bring to God to come back into fellowship with him, there is absolutely nothing in the Torah that you can bring to God that can absolve you of death. The only hope that you have is by the sovereign king. Only he can make that decision to give you leniency, to make you go from death into life. And that, my friend, that is why we need Jesus, Yeshua, because of his blood that was shed to pass us from death into life, which was, by the way, was not a sin sacrifice, sin offering. And many people, there's a misconception that the Passover was a sin offering. It was not. If you go study it, again, don't take my word for it. Go and look this up. Go and verify it for yourself. The Passover was a thanksgiving offering, not a sin offering. It was a thanksgiving offering, bringing his people, the Bnei Israel, from death into life. So we don't keep Torah because the Torah has something in there that's going to save us from death to life. We can't. There's nothing in there. We can keep the Torah every day, all day, and it's not going to do anything for us. The Torah is just meant there to keep us in covenant with God, but we still have a fatal condition, and that's death. And the only sin that is worthy of death is a sin called Pesha. There's other sins. There's Avon, there's Chata, and then there's Pesha. Pesha, there's no resolution for that except by the blood of Jesus, except by the blood of Yeshua. So again, these are topics that are always in debate because we build fences. We want to stick to our orthodoxy. We want to stick to our traditions of the thousands of years of Christian beliefs from the quote unquote early church fathers, or the Council of Nicaea, or the Council of this, the Council of that. When reality, we should just put those things away and just study the scriptures. Study the scriptures from the Hebraic point of view, how they would have seen it. Because if you don't, you're gonna miss all the idioms that Jesus, Yeshua, speaks about. Specifically, like the one I just mentioned earlier about the wedding, about knocking at the door. Many people take that and say, oh, well, Jesus is talking about knocking at the heart, knocking on your heart, wanting to come into your life and living in your life. And that's what they say that saying is. But in reality, Jesus was really giving them a picture of what a Hebraic wedding looks like. So again, I just wanted to make this quick video just to hopefully we can start sitting down and talking together and stop having these online discussions and online debates and going back and forth and building these walls. We need to start to build bridges. We need to break down those fences, tear down those walls, and we need to build bridges. And again, I am not saying to build a bridge in the sense of compromising our beliefs. That's never going to happen. What I am saying is building a bridge between two sides that actually agree on probably 90 to 95%, maybe even more of things. But we're too busy arguing. Please take this in the way that it was intended. In my heart, the intention is to bring us together. And the day that we live in, and people might put this off and say, we've got to just worry about the way we live our lives and apply the Bible to our daily lives, our work and family. And while all those things are good, we need to be looking what's happening in Israel, the war that's happening in Israel. Because when we read the Bible and we see what happens in the end times or the latter days and all those events, there's trigger warnings that are going to happen. And if you don't have your eyes set on what is going to happen in Israel, in Jerusalem, with the red heifer, with the Parao Duma, with the temple being built, which is another topic that I probably don't have time to go into right now. I really would like to talk about it. Maybe it'll be in another video if you want. Again, leave me a comment down below and let me know if there's topics that you want me to cover, and I'll be more than happy to go over them. I was kind of thinking maybe I want to do a YouTube live also, and that I'd consider that too. But again, take this in the way that it was intended, with a good heart of bringing two sides together. Please let me know your thoughts. Consider sharing this, share, and subscribe to this channel, sharing this with as many people as possible. Shalom.